Hi, Mike.
Hello, Doug. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Not bad yourself.
Good, good. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. Maybe that's how we can start this thing off. The Zoom thing's already recording. Had that set up.
Sure.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those only God things that we got connected. I was
Absolutely.
when Brady Shear and kind of everything he does online, and then saw his response video. Do you want to tell your side of that, or?
Just the Brady's cheer side.
Or
Of
yeah, or
the-
just yeah, like were you aware after the podcast that you did with Theology in the Raw that that clip had kind of got any kind of interaction or
I had awareness of positive interactions. As you know, Preston has a very large audience, and so I got a
yes.
lot of really good feedback. But I hadn't actually heard of Brady Shear, although everybody else seems like they had.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
many
that was
people at
the
church.
reverse for me is like I had heard of Brady Shear and then he seemed to bring it up out of nowhere. I'm like, oh, this is the guy I need to talk to. Like
Mm,
this isn't just like how to use social media for church to be the next big thing. Like this is you seem like a big hitter in the kind of space of like church work online, especially with Covenant Eye. And so why don't you kind of tell my audience just who you are, what you do, and kind of yeah, that whole angle.
absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Well, my name is Doug Smith, and I am a husband and a dad of four daughters. I'm a Christian, of course. I'm a lifelong Bible student. I've also been a lifelong software engineer. Um, and about almost 10 years ago now, I started the research into what became my book, which is called Unintentional: How Screens Secretly Shape Your Desires and How You Can Break Free.
Hmm.
And the first edition came out in 2019, and then came out with a second edition in 2021. And so, yeah, I approached the subject as a software engineer and a dad and a Christian and a Bible student, and really have been um, become really passionate about helping people understand what's going on with especially intentionally addictive technology. And that's why I called my book Unintentional, because most people are unintentionally spending the equivalent of a full-time job or more on these technologies,
Yeah.
while the industry is extremely intentional. And I call that an intentionality imbalance.
Mhm.
And so that's really where I approach the subject.
Yeah, it's reached the top of my book wish list pretty quick here, and since I started writing about this, that list keeps getting bigger with like different angles on like what people are thinking about as far as like how the church uses, especially internet-based technologies or just technologies in general. I mean, the big hot thing right now is Chat GPT, which is keeping me up at night and thinking about all the implications that way. But you know,
Right.
but yeah. So, how long have you been working with Covenant Eyes? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, that's such a fun story. So just real quickly, I talk about Covenant Eyes. I've been a fan of Covenant Eyes for 15 plus years more. I've been blessed by them in my own battles, and I've helped many other guys through mentoring and been an ally for a lot of guys on the platform. So I mentioned them several times in my book, and I was speaking at a conference where Covenant Eyes was also speaking in 2019, early 2019. At that point, I was a contractor paying the bills while I kind of started promoting my book at different ways and speaking about the subject. And anyway, we got to know each other, and the guy from Covenant Eyes told me he'd like me to come work for them. So
Yeah,
I thought about it and prayed about it, and it was been a wonderful thing ever since. So I've been there about 3.5 years,
cool,
and I'm the lead Android engineer for
sweet,
Covenant Eyes.
awesome. And so, is that like mostly just making sure it kind of works on like the Android platform, like on mostly phones and tablets, or what does that
Exactly.
all entail for you?
Yeah, exactly. It's a constantly moving target, because the platforms, both iOS and Android, from a technology standpoint, are always evolving. The devices are getting more complicated. They're not super friendly to accountability and filtering.
Really?
Yeah,
No.
go figure. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. It's a constantly we're constantly trying to make it better. I mean, we've been a leader in the space. Covenant Eyes has been around for 23 years, so but yeah, I can go and talk all day about that from a technical standpoint. But
Yeah, no.
basically, on the day to day, I am constantly just improving the product, making it stronger and better, and more able to do what people really need it to do in the face of such significant opposition.
Yeah, I think it's something for a lot of guys. If they came to Christ during kind of technological use, especially in the world of internet pornography, wanting that off switch where it's like, no, I just don't want to participate in this, because it is a different thing. And I actually talked about that in my book. I'm a Christian writer. I wrote a
Awesome.
book called Online as It Is in Heaven, back in, I wrote it in most of 2017, 18, but finally published it in early 2019, right before the pandemic hit. So I
Awesome.
could have all my ideas proven wrong.
Right.
Uh, but I wrote about that where it's like, yeah, it's what online pornography did was it commoditized what should be an in-person experience. You used to have to risk getting caught seeing a mistress, and now you don't have to. We've actually self-selected out so that you can just remove that history. We have entire chunks of time on our incognito browsers that history doesn't exist there, but it does exist in real time. And so
That's
it
right.
kind of like switched the whole kind of paradigm. And there's a kind of correlation there to the online church I'd like to talk about later. But yeah, as far as it goes with like the Brady Shear article, I'd been following Brady and a number of these kind of like online church personalities for a while, kind of giving theological pushback. Like there really is this kind of like full scale adoption model where it's like, well, now since COVID and we've seen that church could move online, that's something I do debate. It's like,
Mhm.
well, then everything's on the table. Like it's not even an Overton window anymore. It's an Overton bucket. It's just shot off one side. There's no wall on that side. And
Right.
you see this kind of just open adoption of anything. It's like, yeah, we could totally do church and discipleship on something like TikTok. It seems like it's just this, I don't want to call it naive, but it is kind of like you don't know the full story about half these things, and we're definitely not in control. This isn't like Lifeway coming out with a social media app that we at least know is controlled by Christians. This
Hmm.
is like foreign bodies, companies whose only kind of modifier is profit and
Hmm.
control over the market, creating these platforms. It's like we can't just look at it as like content, just content arbitrage that we can hop in on. And
Right.
you hit some amazing points in your kind of response to Brady, and
Thank you.
his kind of response to you, which is, I can't believe we're doing this. but
Right.
um
Right.
but yeah, yeah, if you what are your kind of thoughts on that? I'll link the article below, but what are your kind of thoughts on, I guess it would be the persuasive technologies? I think that's what you called it,
Hmm. Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
Brady calls it discovery algorithms and that kind
Discovery
of.
algorithms. Yeah. 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 Well, first of all, I just have to say I was honored by Brady's pushback and critique. It's a great conversation to have. I think Brady represents a majority of people in the church, at least those that I know, who would take kind of an optimistic view of technology and believe what I would say quite a few myths about it,
Yeah.
because they don't really know. They haven't studied the science aspect of it. And
Mhm.
so when he uses a term like discovery out, the social media like Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, they use discovery algorithms, which makes it kind of sound like, choose your own adventure, as I said in the article. It's like it's harmless, and it's just, it's but what we have to understand is that on the big technology side, the best and the brightest of our current technology people are being gobbled up by these big tech companies, along with top neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists, performing thousands and thousands of experiments on us, spending
Yeah.
millions of dollars, millions of hours experimenting. I mean, this is a giant, I could talk about this all the time. It's a giant petri dish on us, figuring out what works. And when we say works, it's what keeps us most engaged. And it turns out
Yeah.
those practices are truly addictive, like clinically addictive for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be spending 8, 9, 10, 11 hours a day, the equivalent of 1.5 full-time jobs on these platforms.
Yeah.
So they're damaging, they're dangerous, they're harmful. And so again, I come against this, the notion that what you hear a lot, and especially in churches, is technology is a tool. It's just a matter of how you use it. You can use it for
Yeah.
good, you can use it for bad. It's like, I have this pencil, and you can write something really great, you can write something really terrible or whatever. It's not that way with there's a lot of things that aren't that way, but especially with persuasive technology, because
Yeah.
they're intentionally designed to be harmful, to exploit us, manipulate us into being profit for the companies at our expense. So yeah, I really want people to understand that there's a difference here. It's ontologically different. It's a different.
Yeah.
So
my angle, and I've interacted with a few kind of online church personalities, and I think even Brady too on that point, where it talks about the internet's just a tool. It's like, nah, it's a tool like all other tools made exclusively by sinners. This is not something that is morally neutral. It's already morally bad, and it can be redeemed. I'll grant that you could redeem it, but it's like, but do we have the kind of access into these platforms to redeem them? Like, is there a way to make Christian TikTok, where it's not addictive and it's just content arbitrage? No, because it's already skewed on the one side. It's
That's
an
right.
ad revenue generator for one side. It's an information gatherer on the other. Like that's not something you can just turn Christian. Like,
Right.
there are the analogy I use in a future book I'm writing is like, there are very few redeemable uses for the stripper pole. Like, you can't. I
Yep.
was like, what are you going to use? Yes, firemen, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we got one example. It's like, but like that's what it was used for. What are you going to redeem it? Like, you can't bring that into kidsmen, can't bring that into youth, can't bring that
Right.
into like any kind of thing. It's like, no, it was an object made for wrath. Hey, look, we have biblical terms for this kind of stuff.
Go figure.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
go figure, right? Just yeah.
No, that's such a good point.
That kind of brings me to my next point, and where I kind of why I want to interview people like yourself and people like Brady and a host of others that really avoid me like the plague, which is unfortunate.
Oh, wow.
What do you think the internet is? Because I think it boils down to how we look at the internet and what it demonstrates to be itself. Do you think the internet is a place, or do you think it's a thing?
That's a big question. So I would make a distinction, first of all, between the internet as a thing and then subsets of things that run on the internet. I mean, from a technical standpoint, the internet is a set of communication protocols.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can think of it's like Morse code.
Yeah.
It's the most effective way to reach the entire world that we've ever come up with. It's the Tower of Babel of our age.
I got the same kind of view of it over COVID and kind of came to that same conclusion. That is really awesome that you think the same way. That makes me at least not feel like such a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist.
Oh no,
so
I don't. I just think it is what it's become. And so is it a place or a thing? I would say it's definitely a thing, but it feels like a place. So we use place-like metaphors. We create virtual spaces. We create meetups, which are, what's a meeting? That's typically when people get together. So we get the feeling that that it's a place, but it's really it's a set of communication protocols that we're building a bunch of tools on it. And ultimately, though, in that sense, it's a thing. And our body, it denies to deny that, or to think of it as a place, denies the reality of our bodies, of us being embodied beings. God created us as body and soul, material and immaterial, and we are a unity in that way. And what we do with our body affects our minds and our hearts and our spirits, and vice versa. And to be decoupled away from that, and all things tech do this to us and give us the illusion that what we do with our minds doesn't matter. Even like some of the video game stuff, I talk to people about that. What you practice, what you think about, we are transformed by the renewing of our minds, even in our bodies, and vice versa. And so there's a lot we can talk about, but I think that gets to the heart of hopefully what you were looking for.
Yeah, no, it does, because one of my concerns over the last couple of years was this drastic switch to online church, and then this kind of persistence of like, we don't want to lose ground here. And it's like, well, I don't think we ever had ground in the first place. Like, what we were doing during the pandemic, from a pretty standard and reformed theological position, was not technically church, because it missed the gathering part. And that was such a low bar to hit for church to exist, that, and I pointed out, like, we could hermeneutically go into several parts of scripture to try and figure out what we're going to define as church, to see if whether or not online church was, something wrong or something right. And it's like, well, if we bring it down to what Christ said about worship, he said, where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am also, and that you will worship in spirit and truth. That's
Right.
like, so 2 people worshiping in spirit and truth. So it doesn't have to be at a church building, but it does have to be 2 people together. That's the lowest common denominator that you could find for that kind of stuff. It's like, did we achieve that during COVID? It's like, well, not really. We, instead of, we had an opportunity to basically resource thousands upon thousands of house churches where you were only allowed to cohort with your neighbors. And instead we're like, no, we're going to turn every living room into a mega church. And that's what we did. And it's like,
Yes.
I think we missed the boat on that one. And what we were doing while we were doing online church, or gathering exclusively online, another term that kind of came out of that, we were actually not doing church at all, but calling it church.
Yeah.
And now we're suffering the consequences of that, and kind of what happened. Yeah. What do you think about that kind of stuff?
Oh, I think you're right on, Mike. I think that's very I think that's insightful. We have kind of, over time, this John Stone Street, I follow his ministry. He talks about COVID exposed a lot of pre-existing conditions. It wasn't like with COVID, we all of a sudden lost our way as far as church goes. We've already been going the route that the church is about a performance. It's not about an interactive gathering. It's about the stage. It's about the show. And for lots of people now, not exclusively by any means. And there's one lot. I mean, there's wonderful things. I love the church. I'm a huge fan. In fact, John Stone Street says the other thing. He often says, the church is God's plan A, and there's no plan B.
Yeah.
So anyway, what I would say is, because we kind of, though, we're gravitated towards, we're an observer, we're kind of a critic, we're not a participant necessarily as a thing, especially as the churches get larger and the mega church thing. We kind of decoupled ourselves even when we were in the building, so that when we moved to video, moved to the online church, it wasn't that much of a stretch. It was a significant move, right? Yeah. But I think because our minds weren't even in what you just said, our minds weren't even in the idea of like, hey, wait a minute, I could be a church here. I could be resourced and like reach my neighbors and build a house church here. And the church would have been bigger after, COVID, rather than smaller.
Yeah. And and I think that's what we're missing right now. And no one strategically in their right mind would admit that kind of wrong. And that's one of the problems, is that if we were wrong on COVID, and now we're on the back end of it with our churches, diminishing attendance, and like the things that we would have had to have done that now might be showing up as being theologically incorrect. No one in the right mind strategically is going to just put their hand up, say this is the wrong things that we did over the last 3 years.
Sure.
There's definitely a need for that kind of stuff. Very early on in the pandemic, Andy Crouch talked about, and I think it's just real prescient of him to be able to notice this, like, no matter what we do, 2020 to even 2023 is going to need to be a time where we need forgiveness.
That's a good call. Yeah, for sure.
I don't think anyone's stepping up. It's like, okay, let's start that process. But it's very clearly a time where not everyone's going to be batting 1,000.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I stumbled upon for my writing, because one of the things I basically wrote a version of what we're seeing with a lot of these guys writing books arguing for online church and like adoption of tech platforms in church ministry and stuff like that. I wrote that back in 2019 before we had kind of that test run, and then had my entire book, gut checked. And now I'm in the process of writing, like a good tech guy, which I'm not. I'm a Luddite. But it's like you need patch notes. You need 2.0 needs to come out.
Absolutely,
and that kind of stuff. So I'm basically just matching the chapter. Like, this is what I thought was going to happen. This is what actually happened, and the theological problems with it, or how I got it right, got it wrong, that kind of stuff. So,
that's great.
That's been a process. I was blessed during the pandemic that my book did not do well. And I'm only seeing that now. It's like, no, it was not complete. It looked complete because it was just idyllic and we didn't have a test run and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
But what got me, and this is something I'd like to ask you just because of your work with Covenant Eyes, because it is this kind of theme that keeps kind of popping up. With like, why did we think that the church could move online the way that we did? And with my own history, just in the church, being a theology nerd, but also having struggled with pornography in the past, I saw I saw a consilience happen, is a word that I was introduced to a couple of years ago, where these two things were lining up that were seemingly unrelated fields that seemed to happen. I don't mean to ramble, but
No, this is great.
we saw that Barna reported that 96% of pastors moved online during the pandemic, as if it was like holy writ from a pope. We just all decided that online church works. I'm like, these guys don't agree on anything. They don't agree on baptism, on women in leadership, on, what's in the Eucharist, when to do the Eucharist. They don't agree on anything. You're telling me 96% of the pastors all decided that this new kind of church is 100% right.
Wow.
Something else is in play here. We don't know what it is, because this doesn't happen. And like, I want to chalk it up to God, except that it closed actual churches. And so it's like, I don't see those things lining up. And what I started looking at the different reports that Barna did and the different kind of data available. It's like, where is this going to line up? Something's hiding in the grass here. And what I found, and this is going to sound tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory, is like, Barna reports that 61% of pastors either do or have struggled with pornography use while they were pastors. And it's like, well, that would sure explain it if you were already exchanging an in-person experience, sex, for an online equivalency, and you had to replace an in-person experience, church, for an online equivalency. And when you started talking with Brady about like tech discipling you back, that's like, this guy gets it. And so I don't mean to like throw that conspiracy theory on you, but like, what do you think about that? Is that off base? Like you work Covenant Eyes, you'd have a kind of handle on what, how many pastors use it. Is this something that, could be plausible at least?
Oh, it's such a good thing to think about. Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, unfortunately, pornography use, even among pastors, is very high. I don't know that I've seen it as high as, I think the overall Christian
That's a conglomeration of two stats. So it's like overall pastors, I think it was like 41%. But if you include youth pastors in that, it becomes a larger number of total number of stuff.
Okay.
And then you also have like, this is a disqualifier for your job. You get fired if you get caught using porn habitually. So like, is that a conservative number, 61%, or is that a liberal number? Like, so
it's very high. And all that to say, yes. And so all technology use has discipleship properties to it. And as I've been thinking through this and wanting to really focus this message on this idea of the discipleship, which I got into on the response to Brady, is that really all you need for discipleship is a trusted authority and then embodied practices that you put into place with in pursuit of following this trusted authority. And that model is from an author I like to follow, a scholar named Drew Johnson, who has written a lot about epistemology, biblical epistemology, and how we know things, and the importance of the bodily practices and the rituals in the Bible and what they taught the people in the Bible. So all that to say, yes, I think I wouldn't necessarily call it tinfoil hat as much as we say, just when we do things over and over again, what comes to mind is based on what we've done over and over again.
Yeah.
And so I think you have a plausible theory there. I mean, if they're used to, whether it's pornography or whether it's just, even if it's not pornography, if it's just, I have a problem. Should I pray or should I Google it? Well, I probably should Google it first. And then if I can't find Google, and then I'll probably pray about it. I mean, so it's in lots of ways we're discipled to think that the screen is the answer, whether it is something as, as serious and morally problematic and spiritually problematic as sexuality, or if it's something as simple as, how do I've got this really difficult problem and I don't know what to do. And I can't, and we don't even really wrestle with things in our minds anymore. We look for a YouTube video that'll explain something to us. Right. And so because of that, that's discipleship, that we're discipled into thinking that way.
Yeah.
Even one of the books I quote in my book is it's a secular book written by um, Scott Galloway. He's a professor in, you've got the four. Yep. Yeah. The four.
Yeah, I got
So,
you, man.
yeah,
This was not the right book to read during a pandemic. I can tell
no,
you
it
that much.
wasn't, but it
Oh my
was
goodness, put you in
helpful.
some. But it was. He is again one of those guys. And you mentioned McLuhan
Oh yeah.
in your
Yeah.
thing. He's one of those guys where like, man, I wish he was a Christian because he's sure acting like a prophet.
He
Like
is.
just
He is. Well, and you know what's frustrating, Mike, is that the secular world is getting it quicker than the church is, and that makes me sad as a Christian. I'm like, it needs to be the other way around. We have the best thing the world could ever,
yeah,
but when what you're even saying here, the world will know we are Christians by our love for one another, the way that the Christians met together and took care of each other. What we could have done in the pandemic, instead of sitting home watching our screens, we could have modeled a whole different way. But instead, we've been discipled by our screens to think the screens are the answer. Meanwhile, the world is kind of passing through that. And they're getting, I mean, we're to the point where the top experts are starting to go, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should stop using TikTok. But with Christians are going, oh, well, let's just join the people on TikTok and do whatever. You know what I mean?
Even before then, like, and that's what made the pandemic really frustrating for me. It's like right before the pandemic, Tristan Harris drops this social dilemma movie, this documentary that just it has this big expose on like how social media and algorithmic, studies work. And like all the talking heads in Christianity hopped on board to talk about how its implications in Christian ministry and Christian families and stuff, and then just turn that switch off so that we can do church online. Well, because of the pandemic. I'm like, it's you either have a standard or you don't. Like,
right.
At least I thought,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, that's a good call.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, maybe that's a good segue into like, and I guess it's not secular because he was a Christian or at least Catholic.
Yeah.
I went when I started like collating, like this is the reading list I need to go through. I need to read what's currently being produced. I need to read, at least try and find what's kind of the foundations of this stuff. So I read like Don't Be Evil by Rana Farrar. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's stuff like that. But I knew, and maybe it's probably because I'm Canadian and we had those heritage minutes on CBC all the time, but I knew about Marshall McLuhan, and I knew it's like, that's probably where this started. The medium is the message. This guy was thinking about that stuff before. So I picked up Understanding Media during a staff retreat and burned through it. Like, again, one of these guys who's just like a prophet. And how did he see this stuff when there wasn't an internet to see? That kind of thing. You kind of interact with McLuhan. What are your thoughts on kind of, did he get it right when he understand, like with what he was saying about how technologies and media, give us different, situations? Or that maybe that they're extensions of us? Was he right about that?
Absolutely. I think, like you say, it's prophetic, and it's so, we just don't really think about it. We tend to just accept everything as it's given to us without really thinking about it. And we have especially a bias towards the new. If it's new, it must be good, without even really thinking about what is it, or what is it for? What was it designed for? What's possible through it? And so I was introduced to McLuhan through Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Yeah, it's like number 3 on my list. Thank you for that.
It's fantastic. It's so good. And Neil Postman, he wrote his book in the 80s as kind of a polemic against television. But he kind of takes McLuhan's even a little bit of a step higher to, he calls it the medium is the metaphor. It's the thing, it's the way that we can see whatever is being communicated. And so every communication medium transforms the message in order to make its communication possible. Like I think I mentioned in the Brady response too. Postman's example is that you can't do philosophy with smoke signals, right? You can't do video with Morse code. Those are really hard and fast things we can't. But then you start thinking about, well, what is social media for, and what does it communicate? What do videos communicate? What do fast, rapid switching, quick hit short videos like that are so popular today? What do those communicate? what do persuasive technology algorithms make possible to communicate? And what we understand is these are shaping even the concepts that come to our minds that we even think about saying. It's like a vehicle of words and language. It's why in 1984, the book, the famous book about Big Brother and all the things, they kept redefining the terms because they realized and they had this thing called the memory hole, which is like get rid of certain words because if you, and that's what's happening now. It's like, man, I just feel angry about what so-and-so said. So what should I do? Well, I should make a video about it, or I should write an angry comment about it. Or, those are the possibilities that come to mind. Why? Because we're being discipled by technology. Because that's what the medium has done to us and shaped us. These other possibilities are even excluded by the very nature of the media.
Yeah. A couple months before I found you, I noticed the same similar thing. It's like, am I being discipled by the technology? Which is why I wanted to write a self-published Kindle book as opposed to doing something different, theologically from that position. Nice. I actually started with the New Testament, trying to pull out all the uses of technology. It's like, this is how people in the early church in biblical times use technology. This is how they thought about technology. And most importantly, this is how the biblical writers teach about technology. If they're going to use technology in a story or a parable, this is how they taught it. This is what it means, pull those things out. And so I've been putting together a commentary, which is something I'm vastly underqualified to do. But it's like that is how we got truth from the scriptures at one point. When we look at great preachers like, Jonathan Edwards or Spurgeon or B.B. Warfield, all that kind of stuff, they did not have an ability to search the scriptures. They had to search the scriptures. They had to read and then digest that knowledge and kind of, go for it. You couldn't start with an idea and see if the Bible backs it up, that kind of edge of eisegesis, where it's like, I'm not trying to make the Bible say what I want to say, but I know the Bible says several things about what I want to preach on, and I'm going to extract content out and see what it is. And so I actually, stopped a few other writing projects I had on the go. It's like, I want to do the slow work of taking the scripture and like, what does this say? How can I be underneath of it? When it talks about this, and what doesn't it say? Because there's a ton of stuff being used to justify tech adoption that has nothing to do with technology, that has to do with other things in scripture that's just being used because it allows you to, kind of loft that idea. So
yes, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Where do you think, I skipped over one here. Sorry. What do you think the biggest blind spot is then for churches as they approach technology? Like I'm blessed to work at a very large church. We have media presence on a bunch of type stuff. We do online services. We do stream services to our multi-site. But like we have decided not to use TikTok at like a top-down level, and I don't know the reasons why, but we've decided not to use TikTok. But what's the blind spots that your average church is going to have when approaching these technologies that you see?
Yeah, that's a good question. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. I think I bring it back again, is that the idea that they think all technologies are basically just immoral tools, or not immoral, but amoral tools that can just be bent to our will like we would choose, instead of recognizing that they are designed for purposes. And for the ones that I specifically push on, the intentionally addictive ones, that's a huge blind spot. They think it's new, it's an app, I can just, they accept it for what it is without digging under the surface and understanding how it was built and what it's doing to us. And so that's a huge blind spot. They just, again, they don't follow the science. They're believing these cultural myths like, that encourage them to run their youth groups with Instagram because all the kids are on Instagram.
That was a big one during COVID, because it was a switch onto that where, and again, it was like, we just did the social dilemma. So we all said that, we don't want kids on Instagram. Oh wait, we're only doing youth on Instagram. Wait a sec. So I ended up talking to our youth pastor about it, and he was very wise about how he approached it. They still do stuff with Instagram, but he's like, we're going to do this for a season so that we can make it through the season. And then we're going to assess from that point. And basically his encouragement was to do it with my kids. So that's like that. It's not just them scrolling on Instagram. Yeah, I'm at youth, but it was us at youth because I usually come in and just sit in my office while they're at youth, you know,
Right.
just, you know, that kind of thing. So that was really wise on his part. But yeah, it was like, I saw it, a lot of churches do that because it gave them an option to like at least keep that communication going, you know, which was, you know, it was noble to an extent, but yeah, it seemed to be like nobility from ignorance.
It was, yeah, it was significant ignorance. The problem is even Facebook knows the mental health catastrophe that they have wrought on the youth, especially teen girls, but boys as well. They have the data, they know what they're doing. As I mentioned, I mentioned in these conversations all the time that the leaders of the big tech companies do not allow their kids to use these technologies.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs did not give his children an iPad. They didn't have it. They send their kids to schools that don't use technology, that tech-free schools. So, but yet, while they sell it to our kids and tell all our schools they're behind if they don't have technology. No, they're behind if they do. And so then the churches go, just kind of embrace all this without realizing this is a very insidious, again, not from a conspiracy theory. It's all documented. It's not theory. It's just the truth. It's, these platforms are, so when they go, well, the kids are on Instagram, not all the kids are. And a lot of parents have this bad feeling and they realize this is harming my kid. But then, Pastor John says, if you're going to keep up with the youth group, you got to sign up with Instagram. Mom, I got to have a phone. Like, that is a disaster. That's just a disaster. I really want to help, in Christian love as a brother I tell you what, I've done so many dumb things. And that's why I can say, when I see dumb things, but God is gracious and forgiving. And so, but now that we know, and now that we're learning, we've got to make a different choice and be much, much more ahead and creative and not continue to harm not just the youth, but the adults as well by adopting these platforms as if they are not what they really, really are.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, guys, and I know I'm a millennial technically, but I trend backwards to kind of more Gen X and that kind of era. Do you think people who got to grow up in this era with their fully developed, adult brain, is that the kind of rub where it's like we do seem to understand it, and that's why we have that unintentionality? It's like, no, we get what it is, we can assess what it is, and it doesn't seem predatory because we can also turn it off. We can also but whereas youth can't. Because I find myself in that all the time where I'm like, why don't my kids get this? And I forget, it's like my kids don't have a fully developed brain, are in grades 10 through 6. And then also have not read 500 nonfiction books, plus haven't gone to college, haven't done all that. But I think I'm still that teenager back in the day. But really, I wasn't. When I got my first, smartphone, I was an adult. I was an adult with kids and a job, like all that kind of stuff. So do you think that has that generational interplay has something to do with kind of the predicament we're in, where it is unintentional, from the parents, to kids then?
Absolutely. I think, well, there's several things going on there, but from the science standpoint, the frontal cortex is not fully wired up until like age 25. And so the younger these technologies are introduced, then the bigger impact they have on the developing brain. And my friends at screenstrong.org, they're one of my favorites on this whole area. Screenstrong.org is like, they approach this whole subject from the medical, neuroscience, psychological side, and just have tons of resources and diagrams and visuals and of all of the things that are happening to the brain. So there's that side of it, but then there's also I think from the guys that are our age that kind of lived through technology growth, like in video games, the early video games, the videos of different kinds, and didn't feel it didn't hamper us in the same ways. I think it did more than we thought, but we kind of have a rosy picture, like, oh, well, this is Pac-Man, this is, or whatever, this is
nostalgia is a hell of a drug.
Nostalgia, that's a great way. Nostalgia.
Yeah, no, it comes back, and they do that to you. One of my kids loves The Legend of Zelda, and it's one of my favorite games too. But
Yeah.
I have to remember, it's like I played that when it was something you owned, and now
Right.
it's something where there's expansions that come out, and like you don't really own the games anymore. They're not objects anymore.
Right.
Everything's subscription based, and so there's this anxiety that you have to play it while you have it, always
Right.
in the back of your mind when you're talking about that stuff, and that gets played like a fiddle, and
Mm-hmm.
it bugs me, the amount of like fake punk music out there that's just trying to like, no, we're punk. Like, you're not punk.
Right.
We were real punk. Like the first concerts that started up again from punk bands that weren't allowing mosh pits because you had to socially distance. And I was like, guys, I don't think you understand what punks were about. They were not about rules at all.
Right. Yeah. Go
Just
figure.
that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it's become this kind of like this real good, iron to press on people to get what you want. It's like, if you can make it nostalgic,
Mm-hmm.
you can just drive people towards products, drive people towards, influencers or like celebrities, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So all that to say, it's a definitely we can be blind because we equate what's happening to youth today and their technology use to the same things that were happening to us. It's different.
Yeah.
It's very different. It's much more harmful and predatory, in ways that I really contend that if as we look back on it in 20 years, people will really wonder, like we wonder, like, how in the world did people ever think they should use leeches for some kind of medical treatments, or how did you
Yeah.
think that, um, why did people think, just all the crazy things about, all, what were they thinking back then? How did
Yeah.
people in Germany, in Weimar Germany, accept the Nazis? How did that
Yeah.
happen? How did people give their children intentionally addicted devices, even when the industry itself was manipulating them into it? How did they do that? Why? And
Yeah.
so I think this generation, this era, and these however long it takes for us to wake up, will be really judged harshly by the
Yeah.
future.
One of the kind of optimistic things I'm seeing about this time is that there really is this recognition that so much of our lives are going online and becoming quite fake. And I think Chat GPT and other AI driven stuff is really going to drive that nail into the coffin, because like we have an opportunity as a church where it's like, every speech you see of a political pundit or a motivational speaker will soon be able to be faked via video. And so, and I'm sure you're going to have churches using that technology so their pastor can take a sabbatical, that kind of stuff. Just, oh, we're meeting online, that
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But
Oh, wow.
we have this opportunity to be like a place where large amounts of people gather together, which is becoming rare, where real connections can be made, where motivational, positive, godly, good, righteous messages can be shared and apply to people's lives. And it can't be faked because it's not online. If that distinction were ever to be made, where it's like, actually, no, church can't be online and it is only in person, and it becomes the only thing that's now in person. Like, like everything's getting an online version of itself, either with like VR spaces or that kind of stuff. Like you could, VR into concerts now. It's like, why would I want to VR into a concert? I want to be in a mosh pit in a concert. Like,
Right.
that's what concerts are for. It's like, that's not a concert anymore. And I'm certainly not paying Ticketmaster what Ticketmaster charges to not, Blink 182 puts it best in one of their songs. They talk about going to a punk rock show and it's $10 to get into a fight you can't win. So you just get it. And it's like that was what it used to be. It's not something that you can just opt into and, and have a nice experience on your couch, like you're, starring in Wall-E, it's
Right.
so it's, and yeah, it's because, and the church really does have this unique opportunity where like everything down from like musical or performances being like that. I don't know how they'd ever do it to sports, but I'm sure they would. There is esports. So like, I don't know how they're going to do it, but it progresses, right?
It does.
So I think church has this unique opportunity, the one real thing in a fake world. And yeah, right now it's, too busy doing TikToks. So
you're so true. And I think to be fair, there's a lot of churches that get it. There's a lot of, there, because the other thing is just like worship of God invites his presence and we have this experience of the Holy Spirit, yes, individually in our inside, but we also have it palpably even more when you're in a service and you're in, and we've been, many of us have been in services where it's been more than palpable. Like, wow, there is something happening in the presence of God is here, and God is speaking to me, and it's because there've been people praying in this place for years. I don't understand how all that works, but God cares about physical locations and our physical who we are and where we are. And so the church, like you said, I think you said that really well. I think the church has a very unique opportunity to be very different in this age, and to give the world a whole different concept of what's real and what's possible, and to draw them away from being plugged into the latest whatever.
Well, like evangelical pastors talk a lot of smack about being countercultural, and it's like, well, that's what countercultural is. And
absolutely,
I guess that's kind of one of my biggest rubs about the online church, is that it doesn't take itself seriously.
Right.
And like when you talk about treating these apps and platforms like places, and going online as if it's a mission, when mission is supposed to be to actual places to establish churches, that kind of stuff. And like, there's nowhere where there's Wi-Fi that there isn't already churches. That's what kind of is my big dig. It's like, this isn't mission. This is actually just normal discipleship. People around you that need to know Jesus because they're in your town. That's not a mission field. That's discipleship. Missions are to where there isn't a presence of the gospel, which like, because we're on topics of tech, it's like, Elon's going to start putting people on Mars. Probably in our lifetime. Maybe we want to figure out how to get Christians there, like, so that, it doesn't become this factory to hell where people are just, like, because it's like, again, it's off topic, but like the church doesn't really take it. I feel it doesn't take itself seriously when it talks about online church and treating these places as like places to go and like interact with people and save them. It's like, because that's not where lost people technically are. You want to talk about the biggest social network out there, that's Pornhub. It's a place where you can do user-generated content. You can interact with other users in the comment sections. There's no content moderation policy, and there's just nothing but sinners and like backslidden Christians there. That's Corinth. That's Corinth.
That's right.
It's like, but no one's going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Why? Because it's not a place.
Right.
It's not Corinth. You can't go there and safely, like, not that missionary work's safe, but you couldn't go there logistically as a Christian without succumbing to it.
That's right.
Like, so how would you do that? Maybe that's a new app for Covenantize, how to upload sermons to Pornhub without going to Pornhub. If you could give me that add-on, man, I could make you millions.
Oh, wow. That's a very intriguing concept.
Real guerrilla ministry, man. It'd be good.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
So I guess that's my real rub with them. It's like, I don't think you take yourself seriously. I think you take it entertainment wise. That like, this is a seemingly safe, a seemingly fun, a seemingly harmless way to do ministry online that really does kind of like, allow us to put our feet up for a lot of things. Like, you can be an online theologian with nothing more than a good backdrop, a webcam, and some time on your hands. And it's like, ministry is not about that. Ministry is about being in a place, dealing with your community, dealing with the people who come to your church and their communities, like that kind of stuff. And I really do see it as kind of this, like, I don't want to say fake, because I understand that real people have connections through these mediums and God does work, but it's almost like that's like a compensational grace that we see when you compare it to the larger work of the church. So,
yeah, I think you're really onto something there. I mean, I do kind of sympathize. I do sympathize with churches who are sharing their services online for people who can't make it. I mean, like our church has an online, just broadcasts one of our services online, not as like a substitute, but just as a courtesy to people who are out of town or whatever like that. I think understanding what that is, and that it's not embodied worship with the church, but it is a way to stay connected to your church, so that it's not like there's no value there. It's just it's not a replacement. If it then ends up becoming, well, I just go to church online and then I get on with my day, I save the traffic, I don't have to go. Like, if you think that is church, then that's a mistake. But if it's like But if it's just like, an add-on, like, okay, we're out of town or we're sick, we don't want to expose anybody to stuff, but we still want to keep up with what's going on at church,
Yep.
then I think that's not a bad thing
I
necessarily.
had an interview with Elias Dummer from formerly of City Harmonic. He was a worship pastor, great guy, really insightful on kind of like how worship and tech go. And we had a great conversation, and we kind of came to the conclusion like it's a great window to the church, but it's not a door. This is not how you
That's a
get to
good
church.
metaphor.
This is how you can see the door. And it was just so insightful. It's like, yeah, I don't think we should give up posting sermons online and even posting clips of those sermons on these sites so that it gets into the arbitrage of these sites at all. But definitely the focus of like, no, this is how we're going to do discipleship on this platform that might be predatory. It's like that. That's where we have to draw the line in the sand for our congregants too, and say this is what we're not going to do, that kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah, the last thing we want to do is encourage participation in those platforms, but we want to pull people
as
away
if it's
from
a
them.
Substitute. Yeah,
Right. But if people are there and we like reaching the lost, and we want to say, that's why I tried to boil down some messages in that article you mentioned, was that what should churches be saying then on social media at all? If you're going to market your message, I would say, number one, tell people to come to your church, like physically come to our church. Here's when, and we love to have you. And number two, be resources that are not on the platform. So that could be like videos and, messages, handouts, whatever. And then number three, get off the platform, so basically those three things. And because that's what people need to hear these days. They need to understand they're welcome in church. They're welcome to participate. And if you will get away from addictive technology, you'll have a lot more time and ability to do that.
Do you think there's ever an appropriate amount that you can spend on these platforms where, as long as you're going into it, knowing that it's this thing that can get out of hand, but is really just silly on the face front of it, that you can just like, no, I'm just going to use this for funny videos for the next 15 minutes, laughing with my kids on a couch. And then we're going to shut it off because, we have to go to Bible study or something like that. Do you think there's like an appropriate, does moderation apply to this kind of stuff, or is it too new to kind of compare? Because you compared it to the smoking industry. And I couldn't help but think, it's like, I agree the smoking industry is this just like vile, predatory thing. And that's why there's so much regulation on now. And thankfully now it's just switched to vaping, really. It's like, but the smoking industry and the cigar industry are kind of different beasts. And it's like, if you have someone who really appreciates cigars, they're not smoking them every day. They're saving them for occasions, that kind of thing. And it's like, is there a moderation for these things that we can kind of draw, do you think?
That's a great question. What I recommend in my book, and that I kind of start from that standpoint. Most of my book, it's only the first 4 chapters that talk about the problem. It's the rest that's a grace-filled invitation to walk in freedom. And what does freedom look like? Well, for the Christian, freedom starts with complete and 100% surrender to Christ. And so rather than looking at moderation, we look at, he's the king, we're his allegiant servants, and we welcome his call and his instructions. And so that's the posture from which I would answer a question like that. Okay. So because there's not a one size fits all answer, right? So I can say, Lord, should I myself have, for example, premium cable channels? No, that's too much of a temptation, Doug. You're not able to handle that temptation. So we don't have that in our house. There's a lot of things we don't have any kind of those. We don't have Netflix, those kind of things, because in my own home would be too tempted by those things. I surrender, Lord, you are, could I do that in moderation? Could some people do that in moderation? Sure. Not me. Now, from a social media standpoint, because I am so tuned into what's happening, I have strong boundaries around what I do there. And so I'm okay doing what I do on there. There's other people in the space who just will not. They do not have any accounts on any social platforms, and that's just it. So what you described, I think, is perfectly fine for most families, and a lot of families do. Let's sit down. We have these certain things we subscribe to on YouTube. We're going to spend a half an hour. We don't do autoplay. We don't do suggested whatever. We're just going
Yeah.
to watch these 5 things. And, what is that? That's intentional. And
Yeah.
if that is in the context of a surrendered life, which is
Yeah.
also pursuing your purpose, and you're not being pulled into sinful practices, and you're renewing your mind with scripture and prayer, and you're doing all the other things that we need to be doing. It's not pushing out the core discipleship that we really need to be having. Then I think there is room for that for many people. But again, we all have to, in the context of our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. I would say, and as you know, with Covenant Eyes, we're all about accountability. We're all about discipleship, kneecap to kneecap, face to face. Like, if your mentor says, Doug, you're probably spending too much time doing this, and are you getting enough time in that? Are you spending enough time in prayer? Are you spending enough time with your family? Or are you spending more time with this? So all of that to say, that's kind of a longer answer to your question, but
that's great.
but I'm very reticent to tell people, if you only limit it to X number of time a day, then you're good.
We as a culture like formulaic stuff, but I think that I think that qualifier, it's like, just make it intentional. Because like, there's times where like, I don't want my daughter just scrolling through YouTube shorts, even though I know she's on parental controls and she's not going to see anything. It's just going to be dumb. It's like, I still don't want to spend that time, but I cherish giggling with her on the couch doing the exact same thing right before bed.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I would rather do that because it's intentional than just allow that so that I can get the dishes done, without having to deal with anything. And it's like that intentional stuff. Like, we had a rule with my son where he was not allowed to have Instagram. Still doesn't, technically. He had it for the pandemic so he could interact with youth, and then we took it away afterwards. We have the account information and whatnot. But I drive a beater 2005 Toyota Echo that has no power steering and is a standard. And it's like, when you can drive that car to youth group and back, you can have Instagram, because Instagram is the machine controlling you, and here's you controlling the machine, and you will this is the same thing in different things. And like, nice. It'll show you what it is. Because the second he's on it, you're just going to get a never-ending stream of football stuff, because he's a big football kid, from your dad, because I want you to be happy and see good things. And if I'm on Facebook, I never approach social medias without the social part. That's like, if I'm on Instagram, I'm finding things for my wife that make her happy. And so our scrolling happens in our messages between each other, not in the general feed, because we're looking for stuff for the other person. They're like, this is a cool idea, check it out. And a bunch of my friends practice that kind of thing, and it seems to redeem it, but it's definitely not how Instagram wants you to use it too.
Sure.
So it's like, how do you make the best of the situation?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think and that'd be an unusual use case that I think that many people would be too tempted by the feed or the other aspects of it, and pulled in unintentionally to be able to really benefit from that. You obviously been studying this for years, and you know what's going on, and you recognize, if you were being pulled in some direction, you would feel the feeling, okay,
the way
I can't go down this
talked
road.
about TikTok and having there for like 5 TikTok, like, no, we're just that. I was on the verge of doing the same thing with Instagram when they introduced Reels. Because I was just using it to post pictures and then post quotes of like my Twitter feed and stuff like that as an author and stuff. And then I got on Reels and 4 hours disappeared. I'm like, oh, we need boundaries. And like, I'll use it for mindless distraction, but I try and I've constructed healthy habits around it, where it's like, you don't get to go on this unless you've read at least one chapter of your reading list, because you have 1,000 books to read, Mike. That doesn't happen if you're on Instagram all the time. So get reading first, and then you can waste your time, that kind of stuff. But that I had a TikTok account for around the same thing, and I couldn't figure out how to engage with it as a writer. I wanted to use the tool, and it was like, this isn't a tool, this is distraction. No. Whereas Instagram at least purports to be a tool on one part of it. But those Reels, they're deadly if you're not careful. You can just spend time, and you can do the same thing with Facebook Marketplace. Like, it's the same kind of thing. It's if you don't have healthy boundaries, then just don't be in that area. It's tricky.
Yep.
I have one friend who is a ghost. He has no social media present. He's this like youth sponsor in rural Alberta. He doesn't have Facebook. He barely has an email. And I think we had to talk him into that.
Nice.
And yeah, that guy's like this oddity. I'm like, they're gonna be studying you one day,
Right.
figuring out how you did it. So,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And he's going to have superpowers in terms of the way he can think and reason and stuff that a lot of us won't have. So
yep.
yeah, he's a fortunate person. Yeah.
Yeah. No, jeepers. Well, I want to respect your time. We've been on here for just shy of an hour here.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of end with like one final question, and then yeah, where should we be looking for resources and books? Like you cite a lot of stuff. I know your book has a gazillion footnotes, which makes me want to read it even more because I'm that kind of nerd.
Yeah.
But like who should we be reading? Like who are you reading in this kind of area that's maybe not hitting senior pastors, desks that maybe they should see? Because I already know what I'm buying for Christmas for everybody. So it's at the top corner of your screen.
Thank you. That's great. Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much really there. It depends on what you're looking for, whether you're looking, but I mentioned Screen Strong. Their resources are really fantastic. They have people like Victoria Dunkley and Leonard Sachs and Richard Freed. These are Dr. Stacy. These are different people that are in the mental health side of the questions. If you're wondering how exactly this is affecting the brain, especially younger people, but adults as well, I totally would go there. If you haven't read Amusing Yourselves to Death, like I mentioned, Neil Postman, that's
it's on there.
You've got to have that. I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan. He's also very prophetic. The Abolition of Man is one in particular that
I finished that last month. I'm trying to work through all my Lewis. I've got a good schwack of it and finished the Abolition of Man. I was like, dang it.
Yeah, I know.
It keeps messing with me. But yeah, he's very prescient, and
he is.
Yeah,
he is. And one of my favorites is the Screw Tape Letters, and that
that was my first Christian book.
Wow.
I was raised as a Christian, in Christian house, and they took me to church and kind of youth function stuff. But when I finally kind of came to no, I want to go to youth group, and I want to go to the Baptist youth group because there were pretty girls there.
Oh, yeah.
But I kind of took ownership of my faith. I'm like, I need to read Christian books. So I went to the library and found the Christian Book Center, and front and center was the Screw Tape Letters. And for some reason it stood out. And that was the first Christian book I read. And It has been a weird journey since then. But yeah,
I was going to say that's quite an
introduction. It's not really a normal entry point. Normally it's something from Max Lucado, but no, let's go with the weird demon letter
Christianity book. Would be probably an easier introduction, lower barrier to entry, but it's fantastic. And it has things in there that just really, my contention in my book is that there are spiritual dimension to what is happening. Ephesians talks about the prince of the power of the air. And that's kind of there. I think there's some probably interesting irony around that, since most of what's happening to us is happening through the airwaves, right? So there's a lot there. I'm also a big fan of Os Guinness. I
read The Call. I haven't read much more of his stuff, but he's really good too.
Super good. Impossible People, I quote in my book, is one of my favorites. That that you mentioned about pastors talking about being countercultural. There's this really big need to be countercultural, and Os Guinness has a really good way of showing what's at stake if we're not, and how to be courageous in doing that. I'm also a big fan of Dallas Willard. And he just on discipleship in general, but he also kind of alludes to some aspects of technology from when he was writing and things. And so I think those are some really, really important resources. But for kind of another kind of prophetic is a French philosopher named Jacques Ellul.
Okay.
A good friend of mine, Andrew McDermott, who runs he's a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute in Seattle, but he writes a lot on technology. He introduced me to Ellul. Ellul wrote a book called The Technological Society, and really talks a lot about what technology in general does to shape us. And more than where I kind of drill down on the screen-based addictive things. He's talks about when we think in terms of applied techniques, and then again we're discipled into thinking there must be an answer, must be a technique answer to every problem I have. And especially since we've been discipled, if you go back to Postman, we've been discipled by either commercials or by movies to think every problem should either be solved in 30 seconds or maybe at the most 2 hours. you know, because we think that there's this kind of an answer, and we're not prepared to live in the real world because we've been discipled again in that way of thinking.
That's a more it's a really insidious thing when people start doing it. Like, I thought about it, and it comes up in kind of weird ways, kind of like a deja vu. It's like, I don't have perspectives on a lot of things that don't come from fictional cinematic universes.
Right.
It's like like I've done a bit of martial arts, and it's like no one does the kinds of things you see on TV without being just in stitches the next day.
Right.
Like they're just like, it doesn't happen. And then like you see it a lot. I hate to say it. It's like, because like you don't want to ruin it. It's like, but there's a lot of stuff where like the physics just don't add up, where you have people like 110-pound girls just like one kicking like a 300-pound bodyguard like through a glass pane. I'm like, the physics don't work. He'd barely feel that. Like, you know, watching even just sports. It's like sports movies versus actual sports, and it's like watching my kid play football. It's, you know, there's actual stuff in play, and so trying to see, it's like, where have I defined my world by fictional examples and not by real world experience, and then like and challenging that ignorance. You know, it's there's a bunch of stuff like that where it's just, and it's very, I think of it as deja vu, where it comes up and like, I only know this, or I only think of this certain thing because I saw it in a fictional circumstance that was presented to me. You know, it's like, so this isn't real. This is someone's interpretation of something real that was commercialized.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. And that, it takes you on rabbit trails. My wife always thinks I'm grumpy because I'm thinking like, oh, I'll be washing the dishes, just thinking, you know, about some obscure tangent of like, do I actually know how to, you know, that specific car would work, or is it because I've watched that movie, you know, that kind of thing. So
the fact that you're asking the question is very hopeful. A lot of us don't even ask those questions, right? Because we just kind of accept it as it is. And you're exactly right. It's because we're immersed in the kind of those fake worlds. We think that is real, and we're missing the real world. We're missing the heavens that are declaring the glory of God. We're missing the wonder of God's creation and getting to know him through what's real. And instead, because the fake is so excites our dopamine cycles and, you know, touches our brain in so many different ways, the real can't touch us in the same way anymore. And until we unplug, but when we unplug, we can get back to it. And so there's always hope to being restored. But yeah, it's quite a web of, you know, bringing it back to what's the internet. It's quite a web of falseness that can definitely keep us away from what's actually real. Yeah, totally. Well, I appreciate your time. I won't keep it too much longer. Looking forward to reading your book. I'll probably email you afterwards with 1,000 questions. I love that. Thank you so much.
This has been really good. Thank you very much. And hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I'd love it. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate the time.
No problem.